yesterday we did the show, and the idea was this offseason was a missed opportunity. And I think we got a little bit more into that, like just before we went live. Like the idea that during this rebuild, or some people want to call it something else because they're not tanking, but during this rebuild, every transactional period, off seasons, trade deadlines, whatever it may be, is an opportunity to acquire talent. And since they have decided, the Philadelphia Flyers have said, we're not bottoming out. We're not guaranteeing ourselves 3 to 4 years of top 5 picks.
Exactly.
We're not doing that. That's eliminating one of the ways to guarantee yourself high-end talent.
Exactly. The easiest way.
The easiest possible way. Bottom out for a few years, get a bunch of blue chip prospects. Whoever works out, and boom, this is your core going forward.
Yep.
They're not going to do that.
Which is fine. That's their choice.
You can get lucky. Maybe Jet Luchenko turns into a fucking star. Matvei Michkov falls to them at 7. He maybe should have gone 2. All these things are possible, but again, higher degree of difficulty. Since they're not doing that, every trade deadline, off-season, free agency period is an opportunity to acquire those players you need to build a championship contender. This offseason, now still lots of time left, but as we're seeing, the big moves seem to be done for the most part. Can always be a surprise. We've seen later offseason moves before. Maybe one of these teams file with an arbitration filing. They have another buyout window. Things happen. We just saw the Flyers do that with Tony D last year. But for the most part, seems like this offseason's over. This is an opportunity that has gone by. It does not mean they cannot take advantage of other opportunities.
Exactly.
But this is one that has passed without acquiring any of those players that they need to compete for a championship one day.
Yeah, I think the difference, because we talked a little bit about this yesterday, the difference between the Hextall rebuild and the Brier rebuild. I mean, I guess Hextall really never called it a rebuild, but it functionally was. The difference between the two is that with Hextall, while there were certainly people that wanted him to be more active, and maybe in retrospect he should have been. My opinion is generally in retrospect he just should have drafted better players or had a better development infrastructure to turn those players he drafted into actual impact guys, which they clearly didn't. But the difference was that Hextall was working with an NHL roster that already had high-end guys. It already had a bona fide star in Claude Giroux and a clear-cut second-tier borderline star in Voracek.
Perennial all-star.
And it had Simmons, who was also in that world
30
too.
30-goal scorer.
And you had Sean Couturier, you had Couturier and Shen. They clearly chose Couturier out of those two. But you had two guys who plausibly could develop into a high-end guy. Couturier ultimately did. So they got that. What I'm saying is that Hextall had a little bit more justification to sit on his hands and just draft guys, be middle of the road for a while, draft a bunch of guys, because he already had that top tier. His bet, and this was the bet that in Giroux's case was proven right, in Voracek's case was proven wrong, his bet was that I'm going to hope to God these guys age really well. That into their early 30s, they're going to stay high-end guys, and then we're going to have the second wave of guys who hopefully are stars, but even if they ultimately end up just being second-tier guys, that really should be enough, because the biggest problem when they were in their prime was they didn't have enough support. They didn't really have any support. Now we're going to get them the support by being patient for 2, 3, 4 years. Briere doesn't really have that. No. There is no Claude Giroux on this team. Sean Couturier, even if he comes back and proves that the first half version of himself is real, that is not 2017, 2018 Sean Couturier where dude deserved MVP votes. He was that freaking good. That's not Couturier anymore. They have Konechny, but Konechny is, I would say, worse than Voracek. Good, but peak Konechny is not as good as peak Voracek.
No. Peak Voracek was a point-a-game player.
Exactly.
Travis Konechny,
point-a-game player and also a dominant play-driving winner.
And also...
Because I think Konechny is borderline point per game, but Voracek, we talked about this yesterday, Voracek never missed games.
Never missed.
And then also was the kind of guy who, when he's on the ice, you're going to collect 56% of the shots on goal and scoring chances.
Zone entry machine, which paired with Claude Giroux, huge.
Huge.
Even if Giroux all right, like those years Giroux was like hurt, it was like, well, he still had like 70 points.
Right.
Because he's really good in the offensive
and he
zone.
was great on the power
He could
play.
dish you a pass.
We
Yeah,
missed that.
like those two cross-ice passes on the power
Incredible
play.
on the power play.
And you have Wayne Simmons in front. You're
You're
going to
score a lot of goals.
Like,
but the point I'm
but
making is that Briere doesn't have the luxury of just being like, well, we'll draft Luchenko's and Oliver Bonks and just have them support the core. Because there is no core.
There's no core.
The core is we're hoping Mitchkov is the guy. Konechny is going to be 28 when his next contract. And then like a bunch of dudes who maybe. But again, that's a maybe. So because of that, because Briere doesn't have those stars, he has to do more work. He can't do what Hextall did, and ultimately Hextall's strategy didn't work. But again, my argument is that it could have worked if he would have just drafted better. Because we know that Claude Giroux aged extremely well. He's still nearly point per game at like 35, 36 years old. Briere can't do that. Briere cannot sell that. Briere cannot sell the like, well, we're just going to draft a lot. Like, no, you got to do things. Now, they didn't have to do things this summer. It's not a total failure. They didn't do things this summer. But for them to succeed, they either need to absolutely blow away their draft picks where you get a couple star players in the third round or mid-first or whatever, or you got to make trades. They didn't make trades this summer, or at least it doesn't seem like they're going to, which means it's a missed opportunity. And at some point in the future, whether that be during the season, this upcoming season, whether that be in the 2025 offseason, whether that be in the 2026 offseason, they're going to need to make trades or they're going to need to go heavy into free agency to get a Panarin type. They didn't do either of those things. They said they weren't going to go into free agency, and the cap situation certainly precludes that. They could have made trades. They didn't. So it's a missed opportunity. Not devastating, not the end of the world, but it is objectively speaking a missed opportunity because of the situation they find themselves in and because of the decisions they've made about the way they're going to execute this rebuild.
And that, like, it's just, all right, if you're not going to do this, you have to do that.
Right.
And thus far, they have not done that.
Exactly.
Like, they still can.
They still can.
They can
to be sure.
at any time between now and 3 years from now. But now would be nice.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean,
We all silly like the mayor.